avoid going out because of fear of criticism and just all that shame that's inside of you? Or do you ever avoid having people over because of the shame that comes up with the state of your apartment and your life? Today I want to talk to you about shame, what it actually is, what it looks like and how it shows up in the different responses that people can have, as well as, well, how does it create clutter in your life? And of course, as always, what are ways you can shift and let it go and transform? So I've seen shame come up a lot with people over the years, especially when I'm working with people in their homes. And what that looks like, well, one, when I do my initial phone call, people would deny it in the past when I first started, and people weren't aware that, hey, I'm here to help you change and let go. I would also notice a lot of blaming. However, as I shifted over the years and made it more clear that I'm really about helping you change and let go, when people do invite me to their home, it still happens sometimes where it's just kind of a one-time thing. Why? Because so much shame comes up that the person was seen in their home, in the state of their home, that it's just too much to have me come back. It's a very vulnerable state to be in, and it brings up all this shame, possibly without them even realizing that that was going to happen. So what is shame? Well, shame is this really intense, painful emotion. And like all emotions, it's communicating something to us. And this one, well, it's all about protection. So whenever there's a trauma, shame comes up and they bind together and they go hand in hand. Because with the trauma, there's some kind of danger, some sense of danger. And so the need for protection comes right after. And the thoughts that join that are, I'm unworthy, I'm not good enough, and there's something inherently wrong with me. Brene Brown actually has a great way to describe it, and she says that shame drives two tapes. I'm not good enough, and who do you think you are? And so that's a pretty hard thing to carry, especially when it's unhealthy shame. That shame that just dominates your sense of self, dominates who you are and your life and all the decisions you make. So what does it look like in your everyday life, and how does that actually happen? Well, let's first look at how it happens. So we all get judged in life, that's just a part of life. However, when you're growing up, there's that constant criticism and judgment. And as a child, you need to survive in that family unit, your parents, your caregivers, your siblings, they are the ones that are going to determine your survival. So that shame comes up, and instead of being your authentic self, oh, someone just judged me, I can't do that again, then you start changing your behavior because of that shame, because of that fear, because of that need for protection. And if that shame and that trauma isn't dealt with into adulthood, you're going to see that you develop unhealthy coping mechanisms that which also create clutter and affect all areas of your life. The other aspect of what it does and what it looks like is that, well, if you are a child and you're being told you can't do this, you can't do that, and don't talk so loud and don't talk too much, you're going to keep yourself small. You're going to keep yourself hidden so that you're not seen. Because again, that protection, if you're not seen, then nobody can criticize you. So you don't take those big risks. You don't take those chances to grow. Because unless you take a risk, you're not going to grow. And so with someone who has a lot of shame, that prevents you from growing and achieving the things you want to do in your life, and inherently just allowing you to be yourself. So I will definitely do another video around those dynamics in the family. That's a longer topic. What I want to talk more about today is the shame responses. And what's interesting is that the shame responses coincide and kind of parallel with your F type, which is freeze, fawn, flight, or fight. And just like the F types, you're not necessarily just in one dominant F type. It depends on the circumstances, who the situation is with, that a certain F type will pop up. However, we do tend to have particular F types that our body goes into, our nervous system takes us into. And so there's also this parallel between these F types and your shame response. And I want to give you kind of a view of that because I'm a strong believer in there are many pieces to the puzzle. It's not just one thing that explains everything. So, I'm a very highly sensitive person, so that explains all my behavior. No, there's many pieces to the puzzle, and this is another one to add on to. So if you haven't watched the F type, I definitely recommend checking out those videos. So let's look at the first shame response, which is fawn and cling. What does that look like? Well, people pleasing. That sounds like a fawn, F type, right? You'll do anything to belong and anything to survive. So that means enabling behavior, that means perfectionism, that means people pleasing. And it's similar to denial because you're denying that your boundaries are being crossed. You're not paying attention that, the things that you're doing are affecting you and affecting your sense of self and your ability to be authentic. So what does that look like around clutter? Well, for one, you're not taking care of yourself. Your self-care is down the toilet. Your personal finances, it might be a mess. You just might not be putting that time and energy into your career, which then affects your finances and your budgeting. So everything is kind of not being addressed. That's one possibility. Another thing is that you're so busy taking care of everybody else because you want to belong and you're clinging that your life is not being taken care of. Your dreams, your clutter, so to speak, is not being taken care of. And so let's see what the next one is because they actually connect. The next one is, attacking the self. And that is really that inner critic. And that is the toxic shame where you're constantly criticizing yourself, constantly in fear of criticism. And to counter that, there's this need for extreme perfectionism. Because again, it's not just about staying small, it's also about making sure that you cannot be criticized. And so what that looks like, and then two, with that, it's also, I'm not good enough. It's also, there's something wrong with me. And that's definitely a theme overall, but it's definitely very dominant in attack self, shame response. And so what that looks like, well, I've seen it show up in different ways with clients. For one, I've seen it with cleaning products, believe it or not. Having an abundance of different cleaning products. I like to keep things simple in all areas. I literally have a bottle of vinegar and essential oil and, just soap to wash the dishes, soap to wash the clothing, baking soda, and a little bit of bleach, and call it a day, multi-purpose. However, if you're in that attack self mode and you need to be perfect, you want to buy a product to clean this, a product to clean that. And so that everything is done to the T, as perfect as possible. But then you're left with so many products, whether it's makeup, whether it's cleaning products, whether it's clothing, because every tiny little detail needs to be addressed. So you end up having way more than what you need, which makes it completely unmanageable to maintain. And then two, what ends up happening is you don't realize how much you have, because most likely you have it in different locations, and then you're buying things over and over again because you can't find them. So that's one way that it shows up with attack self. Another shame response is withdraw. Now again, attack self, fawn, and withdraw, they're more on the freeze fawn mode, dorsal vagal at the F type. And withdraw, if I'm frozen, I'm going to isolate. I'm going to be stuck in victimhood. I'm going to feel sorry for myself. I'm going to kind of have this sense of not being able to trust others because I'm in such extreme danger. And I'm going to go big time within. And so think about that. Same with the fawn, same with the attack self. They're more of an inward movement. They're more going internally. And think of it, there's slower energy, slower movement. And so with the withdrawal, there's also the dissociation that comes into play. And with that, well, if I'm so withdrawn and I'm dissociated, I'm not even going to notice what's in my space. I'm literally not even going to see it. I'm going to be tripping over things and kind of be like, okay, and just kind of, stuff's going to be everywhere, which happens with all shame responses, well, most F types, but the difference is that you actually don't really see it because you're not even present enough to see it because of the dissociation, which does happen in other areas as well. And so that brings me to the next one, which is denial. Denial to me and addictions and fight mode, there's a lot of similarities because facing the truth is way too painful and now we're lashing out. So if you're in that state, you're lashing out towards others. It's not your fault. It wasn't you. You're blaming everyone else. There's rage, possibly violence, and just this need to numb because it's too painful. And then that's where addictions come in. Everything from alcohol, food, sex, shopping. Because you don't want to feel, so you numb it with these coping mechanisms. And so what that means with the clutter is that things literally don't get done because in your denial, you're lashing out. Most likely that fawn enabler is doing things for you. And so everything's pretty much a mess if you're on your own and you cannot manage, you cannot keep up with life. So the clutter is not just the physical, it's in all areas and things are very chaotic. And so the other one that goes with that is attack others. So again, there's this like outward movement because you're putting the blame outward instead of going within. And so you're lashing out, again, there's this rage energy, there's this avoidance victimhood, and then you don't deal with things on your own because you actually don't see your part in it. And so attack others and denial, again, are very similar. And so the piles are there, and then again, you have an enabler if you're with someone who's doing things for you. So again, we kind of almost have two polar opposites here. We have the ones where the energy is coming within, you're going internal and you're blaming yourself. And then we have these other ones that are more outward and lashing out. And you not necessarily one or the other, but there usually is a tendency to be one or the other, and then, opposite sex attract. So maybe if you are in that outward lashing movement, you're with someone who goes inward, and then you end up having a very dysfunctional dynamic. Ask yourself, what was your parents' dynamic? What was your dynamic with siblings or other family members, friends? And how is it now? How does it show up in your spaces? And which shame response do you think you are? And how does it show up in your spaces and how you spend your time, your relationship to your finances, your career? These are questions to ask. And that brings me to the next point. Well, now what? Well, first step, I always recommend getting support. A scale can't weigh itself. So to do this kind of inner work on your own doesn't have the same impact as if you work with a trauma coach, a therapist, doing relational healing as well, so with a friend or a partner, and having as many people to support you as possible, because each person fits a different piece of that puzzle to help you release and transform. So once you have that support network, the guidance, the education that you need, then it's time to start identifying, well, what are my shame responses? How do they create the clutter in my life? And what connection do they have to the past? Is there something that's unresolved and that's why I have the shame response still? So once you do that, see how that reaction is affecting different parts of your life. How is it affecting your spaces, your relationships, how you spend your time, as I mentioned, and your actual ability to create in your life. And once you've done that and you've kind of mapped everything out and put it on the table and you've named it, well, how can you start shifting that story? How can you start releasing that trauma? And that's where the support comes in, to do somatic work, to do mindset work, to do changing your perspective, changing your story. And then go, okay, well, what do I want to tell myself now? If I was telling myself, oh, I can never do this, I'm not good enough. How about I'm going to learn? I want to learn how to do this. Because there's always, if there's a will, there's always a way. So I hope that was really helpful for you in the first part of this series around shame, because shame is that painful, intense emotion that can dominate our lives and take over and prevent you from being able to let go, declutter, get focused, be intentional, push yourself to grow. And by knowing your shame responses, whether they're withdrawal, denial, attack others, attack self, and of course that fawn, once you're able to see those 5 different areas and when they show up, then you can start knowing, well, what do I want to shift and who am I going to get the support from to help me shift and release that and create new ways of being so that I can be my authentic self again and live the life that I want. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for the next video. And of course, if you haven't already, like and subscribe and even share. Thank you, and until next time, take care.